I don't know. Usually, sorry.
I know. I was like, how long can I go? I don't know.
That's the best way to start. Actually, that's how we start.
Yeah.
Just
See who talks
see who
first.
starts first.
That's a negotiation tactic. Actually,
Yeah.
you sit there and you're never the first to talk because it gives you all the power. And so you just wait for someone to talk.
I can go a long time.
Yeah, I'm a man of few words.
Podcast.
We might be the most introverted three people that are in public life of all time.
Can we just do an April Fool's episode where it's just silence?
It's funny that you said that. When I was taking Lincoln home from bass lessons yesterday, I was talking about how I'm like getting my pool ready, and he's like, you could just go to the public pool, and I'm like, yeah, but there's people. So
Yep.
Yeah. I don't.
We're happy to be here to shepherd you.
It's extroversion is a learned behavior for all three of us. Yeah. All right. So welcome back to Kingdom Refresh. This week we're going to talk about divorce.
That was good timing. You probably didn't hear it on the podcast, but he said
Honestly,
divorce,
they
and his
might
phone
have.
buzzed.
I'm going to put that on. Do not
And
disturb.
it was Gabby saying we need to talk. I was like, oh,
Oh gosh. Well, so funny story. On Sunday, she had like a ton of allergies, and so she's sitting there, and her eyes are just like pouring down, and she's like, "Somebody's gonna look at me and think that we're having marital problems right now," because he's just preaching, and I'm just like pouring down water.
she was my one anchor for the morning. I'm like, it's really ministering to her. I'm like, I should have made fun of them. She's crying now. Yeah. It's always interesting when your kids or your wife are in there and you have them as an analogy, because people look over, it'll be like, is that true? And then I saw when I was talking about pre-engagement counseling and I was telling the whole story, I saw my daughter look over and my wife's like, no, yeah, that's what we did. I was like, see, this is kind of funny how that works out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there was some pressure in the room too.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
pop the ring.
I hope there was.
Yeah.
You know who you are.
All right. So just got a few questions again, and we'll kind of roll through these and kind of chat about this kind of stuff. So first one's just kind of a softball, kind of recap the message a little bit. What does Jesus's teaching in 31 and 32 reveal about God's design and intention for marriage?
Yeah. Probably my top three to answer that would be God decides what marriage is. God designs it. God institutes it. And God is the only one that can truly end it, Because by saying, yeah, you can get a certificate of divorce, but it doesn't matter. This is what's true. And so can you imagine being like in that situation where you've just certificates are flying everywhere, first marriage, second marriage, probably third marriage for a lot of these guys. And then Jesus is like, oh, and by the way, you're committing adultery, because he just taught on adultery, right? Mm-hmm. So he just talked about lust and how that causes you to commit adultery. And then he elevates the sin of adultery beyond just sleeping with someone, and then immediately talks about divorce and then says, if you're divorced in the way that you've been doing it, you're committing adultery. It's like, everything's adultery with this guy.
Well, yeah, it was like because I feel like this one's like the, because we've talked about, you've heard it said, but I say, and I also say,
That's what it is,
it's like, oh, so yeah, okay, well, I didn't take it far enough this time. Well, here you go.
Yeah.
Here's this next part that you're not going to like either.
Yeah, and then like immediately after that, what we're talking about this Sunday is, this being true to your word. So he's like, be true to your promises, but also now be true to your word. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine just sitting there and never heard anything like this, and then you're just like, okay, maybe it's gonna lift, and maybe he's gonna leave with a joke.
Everything
next time.
Everything I've learned is wrong.
Yep.
It's like the like the history when you're a kid versus when you're in high school. You know,
Yeah.
like you're like, oh, they didn't teach us that.
Nope.
Any other comments about that one? No.
I said top three, but now I've forgotten. Oh yeah, so God designs marriage, and He decides when it's ended. Also, like I said on Sunday, God's permission is not God's prescription. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. There's an allowance for it, but you should exhaust every effort to not do it. And I shared my dad's story a couple of weeks ago. By all means, my mom had every right biblically to divorce and feel completely vindicated, not vindicated, but, completely valid in doing so. Yet they gave marriage a second chance, and they have now been married for a very, very long time. 40 years this year, actually. It'll be, no, sorry, it's next year. 40 years next year. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a friend of mine who he used to be a youth pastor. This is over 10 years ago, and he slept with someone else in the church. Lost his job, and he shared this story with me about how his wife reacted when she first found out, and she was walking up to him, and he was thinking, she's gonna like slap him in the face, cuss him out, and she'd be totally justified in doing all of that, but instead she hugs him and says, "There's nothing you can ever do that'll make me stop loving you," and that broke him inside, and he just, as a result, I mean, can you imagine being in that, like, after doing something so horrible and then being shown such grace and love in that scenario? But it really caused him to turn his life around and realize the gravity of what he's done and how much he's hurt her, and really work to repair the relationship. And now it's one of the strongest relationships I've ever seen. But yeah, just to add on to that point.
That's a picture of grace for sure.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And that's how God wants us to react. That's how He reacts to us. And that's probably the third point was, there's nothing that God hates that's too strong for God's heart. Yes, He hates sin, obviously, all sin. He hates all sin. And then there's specific things that the scriptures say God hates, and divorce being right at the forefront of it. But there's a reason He hates it. It's because it is a complete misrepresentation of His love for the church. And that's a perfect picture of a bride, of how God would treat His bride, except for, I guess, the reverse.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's hard. I people will come from broken homes, and they say the sin of the father visited on the son, or history repeating itself. Some people call it a generational curse, and they misunderstand what that truly means. It's not like this spiritual thing where it's like, if your parents got divorced, you're doomed to be divorced. That's not at all. Sometimes what happens is you experience a tumultuous marriage, like I did, and I see the hurt that was in my mom. I see the brokenness in my dad. Had they not reconciled, possibly the generational curse would exist in me, right? I might have fallen prey to that. But because they did reconcile, and I got to see what good was in conjunction with what bad was, it made me so repulsed to the bad in my life. So I have massive guards up when it comes to that subject. There's just, I can imagine it because I've seen it, but I couldn't imagine doing it because of probably what your friend experienced, that brokenness. Fortunate enough for me, I didn't have to go through with it because I had kind of a proxy in a weird way in my parents. And, even when you're not teaching your kids, you're teaching your kids in the bad things you do, but then also in the good things you do. And I just got to see it happen in tandem. Really, really bad, destructive stuff, all of the enemy, but then really great redemptive stuff, all of the Lord. And that has made all the difference for me.
Yeah, well, and I think the generational curse conversation a lot of times is it becomes an expectation on you because you're like, well, they didn't have a good marriage, so why should I? And that becomes ingrained in your head that I shouldn't be happy, or I shouldn't whatever. And that, I mean, that's with anything, with alcoholism and anything else. It's like it becomes this like, well, I'm just doomed to fall into it. And it's like, well, that's not how it should be. Like, you should be able to get past it and say, I'm not going to let that be my story. And that's where you get the, the breaking of the generational curse or whatever, where it's like, I'm going to make a conscious choice to not let that be my story, and I'm going to get through it. And then hopefully, as your kids grow up or whatever, that won't happen to them either. And it will, it'll become a fleeting memory like, for your family.
Certainly true for my wife. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her dad actually remarried. So there's also some hope in that, because he remarried. They have a great relationship. People hate their mother-in-law. Like, I love my mother-in-law. I think she's great. I love my father-in-law. I just got lucky, I guess, because, it's like I just married into a great family. And so here's Erin, who came from a divorced family, but then in the remarriage, was given a gift in her stepmom, and she doesn't call her stepmom anymore. She calls her mom, and it's funny. Well, it's not funny. It's kind of sad, but it's interesting, I should say. We don't generally talk about her mom passing away in front of the younger kids because, they just don't know. And recently in a message, I talked about my brother passing away and my wife's mom passing away. And I was listening back to the sermon. Sometimes it's the most uncomfortable thing is to listen back to your own sermon.
That's for sure.
And same thing with music, like to listen back to yourself singing. But I trained myself to do it, to point out every little flaw, because it's the only way you can get better. It's very, very hard. So I'll listen to it on the way home, make sure I didn't spout any heresies. And I just wasn't thinking. My son was in the car, and his little hand goes on my leg, and he goes, "Dad, why didn't you tell me your brother died? I'm so sorry." And I'm like, oh my gosh, we hadn't told him yet.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he found out through the message. And so he didn't know that. And so he was just oblivious, and same with my wife's mom. He always thought, and he was getting a little upset. He's like, "Nana Dana died?" Kind of thing. I'm like, no. Difference. Tell me about Minecraft. He's like, "Well, the withers are," he goes into that and stuff. But all that to say, there is hope too. In after the ruins of a divorce, there's still hope. And I think Christ offers that as well, as he's saying, anyone who marries a divorced woman causes her to commit adultery. That's a really strong thing, because not only are you sinning and committing adultery, you are causing someone else to sin and commit adultery. And I have to think, as you're hearing this, something comes to mind. It's better to have a millstone tied around your neck than to cause a little one to stumble. So it's so nuanced. There's so much to it. It's not just something that affects you, is what he's saying. It affects other people to a point where it'd be better for you to be dead than to cause someone else to stumble. Very strong, very strong words by Christ.
How does our modern understanding of marriage differ from the cultural context in which Jesus spoke these words, and what implications does it have for how we interpret and apply them today? So modern understanding versus their culture.
Yeah, we've exported the responsibility of accountability for marriage to the state. We're very statist when it comes to that. And almost as if we've also exported the definition of marriage to the state. Whatever you say, we'll vote and we'll decide for ourselves. It's like, well, that's never how it was. And certainly in the ancient world, in regards to Christian marriage, is in regards to the way that God's designed marriage, people get weird when you say it's a uniquely Jewish Christian thing. This whole idea of marriage, people think, well, those Christians trying to steal something from us. Again, it's like, no, it's quite the opposite. God created marriage. So we're very contractual in our culture, and probably the death of marriage, or I should say, the death of the value of marriage in our culture. Unfortunately, great president, not all great. Ronald Reagan signing no-fault divorce, and later on in his life, he actually said his biggest regret was signing no-fault divorce in California. And as California goes, so the rest of the country goes, as we're finding out in Illinois here. So basically, just being able to write anything you want on the line to end a marriage made it so much less valuable. I think I mentioned in the message that covenantal inflation is not transitory. We need to see that for what it really is. There's an idea of, inflation of money. The more money you flood, the more money you print, the less your existing money has value because there's more of it, right? Basic economics. Someone else actually posited that there is an idea of the inflation of rights, and it's a very similar thing. The more rights that the government grants to people, the less your existing rights have value. Same idea. The less the value your existing rights are. And so that begs a question too. Where do your rights come from? Do your rights come from the state? Do your rights come from what we collectively agree your rights are? Or do your rights come from a higher power? Do they come from God? I mean, it says in our Constitution, you're endowed with rights, inalienable right. I can't say that word. Irrevocable rights. These are not, and by your creator, endowed by your creator. And we certainly lost that when it comes to marriage. That is instituted and then sealed covenantally by God. I think I mentioned the vassals and suzerains. Suzerain's a fun word. Suzerain, that's a fun word to say. Francisco, suzerain.
Sounds
God
like
is the suzerain,
like
but
a
we've
new vaccine.
Suzerain does brought to you by a suzerain. It does.
Have you been having trouble with?
Yeah. Side effects may include being held to your word. But the suzerain is God. He's the one that has the ultimate authority. When people enter into a covenant, the Lord, the suzerain, says, you go before him and say, he did this, I did this, are we still bound? And then the Lord or the suzerain says, yes, you're still bound. No matter what he says, it's in play. And that's the same thing that should be with marriage. It's like, he called me a name. You're still married. He did this. You're still married. He cheated on me with, okay, fine. You can end it. You don't have to, but you can. That's not the way we do it in modern culture. It's go until you don't want to go anymore.
Yeah.
And then move on. It was a nice season.
We're just not feeling it anymore.
Yeah. So that's really the difference. And it's hard to even see the difference because it's kind of a fish that doesn't know it's wet. We've always experienced this. I remember in a weird way. Oh, this is going to get deep. Okay. So I remember in a weird way when I was a kid, all my friends, their parents were divorced, and my friend who I play with in my neighborhood would go with his dad for the weekend. And because I wanted to fit in, my parents weren't separated or divorced at the time. I would just kind of slink back and stay quiet. As soon as my parents were separated, I felt like I finally belonged to this group of people because that's how prevalent it is in our culture. To where a kid's like, oh, I fit in now because my parents are separated, right? I found identity in my plight of being a child of a divorced family, a broken home. Like that, there was some sort of pride in that, and we see that in all sorts of areas of life now. The idea of intersectionality or the idea of a victim hierarchy, right? We're a culture that wants to have our identity in how we are, how oppressed we are, or how hurt we are, or how hurt our people group are. And it was no different. And divorce fits right in there too. It's like, I come from a broken home, and so that's my identity, right? And all those kind of things. that's what culture is. Culture says, yeah, divorce is so prevalent that to fit into your friends group when you're a kid, your parents have to be divorced too. Isn't that weird?
It is.
Yeah, and I feel like it's definitely countercultural to have parents that are still together. Well, and even, like I have a side business that I'll do weddings and things, and one of the things you see a lot at receptions, it's like, okay, everybody come to the dance floor that's married, and then whoever's been married the longest stays on the dance floor. It's like everyone's celebrating, like, oh, you've been married for 70 years, and it's like the conversation is, wait, like shouldn't they still be married?
That's a surprise, right? And people,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm going to celebrate 20 years of marriage on Sunday, and there was an audible applaud, and I'm like, I'm basically just doing the thing that you're supposed to do to be married. It's like, it's like I've had my kids for 40 years. Nobody's going to applaud that.
Crickets.
Right? They'll be like, well, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't kill your kids, it's like, but yeah, it's just the way the culture goes. Now, I do want to say a word, because this is in no way meant to shame people who have been divorced.
Oh yeah.
There's enough hurt and turmoil over it. And that's why I like this, I like to reiterate, God has grace. He gives more grace. But we should never, just because of the prevalence of something, accept it as the standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is not the way the kingdom works. The kingdom is very counterculture. And it might feel at times that it is not counterculture because we've grown up in such a cultural Christian nation, not Christian nation, but very culturally Christian. And we forget where all these ideals actually came from,
What role does forgiveness play in the context of marriage, especially when dealing with issues, which we've kind of touched on this a little bit. But I mean, obviously it's important. Like forgiveness is important for any relationship, really. If you have, like we've talked about, the when your friend is at, when you're going to make your offering at the altar and you have something against your friend, you should leave and go, make amends with your friend. And so it's like, there is scripture about the forgiveness aspect, but, like specifically from a marriage context, what's the importance of making that a priority in your life?
It's difficult to imagine how a marriage or any relationship could really function if there is no forgiveness. Especially just considering the fact that we as people are imperfect and we're going to make mistakes, and to hold on to bitterness, to not be able to forgive, that's really obviously going to drive a wedge in any relationship. But yeah, especially marriage.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is the best point about this us talking about the Sermon on the Mount, is everything builds on top of each other. So, you just mentioned like bitterness, like that's the anger conversation we had. And so it's like, okay, well, so if you have anger, that's not good because it turns into bitterness. But okay, then we're talking about marriage. Well, how do you keep your marriage healthy? Forgiveness. And that's by not letting anger, so it's like, it's this cool like stair step of like, they all have to be there for this foundation to work. And they all kind of, I guess, technically you can say like it creates the foundation of the kingdom. Like these are the building blocks of what it looks like to be a good person, and how we can as a society work together and things of that nature.
Yep.
And I think it kind of leads into the next question, which I know you discussed a little bit on Sunday, how it's like, what marriage advice do you have? And it's like, never go to bed angry.
Yeah.
And you're like, we go to bed angry all the time.
Yeah.
It's so true. But how can we, like as married couples or people, be able to prioritize communication and mutual understanding to prevent conflicts that would lead to that level of discourse, or that level of feeling like divorce is the only option?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I mentioned in a message quite a while ago, I'll bring it up again because I love it. There's a conversation with a rabbi. I forget the name of the rabbi, but the young man was asking the rabbi, what's something that you've learned, throughout your life? And he says, well, I wrestle with God. And he goes, you wrestle with God? He goes, yeah, wrestle with God. And he goes, and you hope to win? And he goes, oh no, I hope to lose. He said, when I was a young man, I wrestled with Satan, always hoping to win. But now that I'm an old man, I wrestle with God, hoping to lose. You can kind of gauge your spiritual maturity with who you're wrestling with in certain areas. If you're still wrestling with Satan in certain areas, it's time to find some help and some brothers and sisters to help bring you through that, because that means you're still wrestling against things that you've been freed from, right? So if you're wrestling with temptation for lust, that's a wrestling match with Satan. If you're wrestling with trying to love your wife after 40 years, that's a wrestle with God, and you need to lose, because if you lose, there will be all love. If you're wondering if your marriage is rocky and things are tough, and you're wondering, is it going to work? Go and wrestle with God, and He will tell you how to make it work, and it's not going to be fun. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself for her. When Christ gave His life for the church, in fact, it was one of the statements from the cross, whipping Him, beating Him, nailing Him to the cross, gambling for His clothes, mocking Him. And He says, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Sometimes as husbands, we will take things very personally from our wives, or things that are happening that she has no idea what she's doing to us. She's just doing them, and we'll let them inflate in our mind, and then our ego will get away with us, and we'll think, I can't believe she's doing this to me. Well, that's not acting out of love, because Jesus didn't do that. He didn't say, I can't believe they're mocking me and calling me the king of the Jews and saying if I were really the Son of God, I would come down off the cross, but I can't. And that's not fair that they're saying that. No, He just said, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And so often in marriage, the things that we're doing that is such a plight or such an offense, we just don't know what an offense that we're creating toward our spouse. And so to have that forgiveness, like we just talked about forgiveness, to have that grace is such an important thing. But realizing that these are wrestling with the things of God. And then to get into that wrestling match and be like, God, just break my hip. Change the way that I walk. Make it harder for me to fight against the things that You've called me to do. And the more He wins, the more you win, right? But if you are struggling with lust for a coworker, let's say, or you have an inappropriate relationship there, you should really be seeking more spiritual maturity, really be seeking to not just work on your marriage, but work on your relationship with the Lord and the purity of your own heart, coming to a place where it's like, yeah, I don't want to cheat on my wife, but it's like even more so, I don't want to offend my God. And if you're not worried about offending God, then you're not going to be worried about anything, because again, He's the higher power. He's the one who holds power over the covenant. So if you don't care about what He says, then, what somebody would say, a friend of mine would say that he would never hire a man who cheated on his wife. And I was like, dang, that's strong. I said, why? He goes, because if he could lie to the one he loves the most, he could lie to anybody. Same thing with the president. If a president cheats on his wife, he's like, he's never going to tell us the truth, because he can lie to the one he loves the most. Well, for Christians, the one we're supposed to love the most is Christ. And if we can offend Him, we can offend anybody.
Yeah.
I think too, the kind of important thing there as well is finding the root cause. Like, a lot of times when you say you are having feelings for a coworker or something like that, there's typically a reason why
I'm kidding. Sorry. Cut that part out if you want.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I feel that I love you.
But it's that like there's got to be a reason why you're feeling that way, figuring out what that reason is, and then addressing it. And one of the things I'm trying to think of the book, I think it's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, but don't quote me on that. But they talk about 4 things. They talk about wounds, lies, vows, and strongholds. And the idea is that you have a wound, then Satan speaks a lie, and then it becomes a vow that I will never do that again, or I will never let anyone do that to me again. And then it becomes a stronghold in your life. And so like sometimes it's, the conversation of bitterness and whatever, when we let these little wounds become bigger than they should be, then it becomes bitterness, it becomes resentment, it then becomes feelings for somebody else, or I'm going to do this because it makes me feel better, so a lot of it I feel like is communication of understanding, hey, when you said that, it hurt me. Mm-hmm. And that's, a lot of times, I mean, it happens to me all the time where, I'll make a stupid joke comment or something, and then it comes back as like, it didn't make me feel good when you said that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I was just joking. Well, me joking doesn't change the feeling of how my wife feels when she heard it, or when, so it's this idea of we need to understand each other's feelings and communicate, and be, both parties of a marriage should feel free to say, I didn't like that, or I didn't, there should never be a point where you should feel uncomfortable to say like, hey, can we talk about this? Let's communicate.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be, some fights in a marriage because you've got 2 people that are different. It was actually, so I think Jordan Peterson that actually said, couples that never fight are actually like more likely to get divorced.
Yeah.
Because likely it's, they're not having the tough discussions that they need to.
I'm sure he used a lot more words than that to
Probably.
say exactly what you just said.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he did.
I don't even, you're like,
There's a whole
sorry,
chapter.
I didn't mean to derail you.
No, yeah, you're good. But yeah, so, there's going to be fights in marriages. You've got 2 people that are different and are going to see things differently. So it is just an inevitable thing. One thing slightly off the question that we were on about, because we were talking about, struggling with feelings for a coworker.
I don't like the gesture.
Look, you guys do you. But, I think one problem that I see is so often marriage kind of gets, or love gets really defined too much as just, a really strong feeling. And then what happens is, well, what happens if one day, we wake up and I don't have that same strong feeling I had on my honeymoon for my wife? Or what happens if I'm at Walmart and there's some lady that walks by and, my heart jumps. We have this distorted Valentine's Day kind of view of love. And just going back to the, we're supposed to love our wife as Christ loved the church. When you really think about just all that Christ has done for us, and just the love that Christ has for us, it really shows just, I think, what true love actually looks like. I mean, Christ, Christ sacrificed himself for us. And I think for most guys, I don't know about you guys, but I would picture in my head almost like a movie. I'm walking down the street with my wife, and then a gunman shows up, fires a bullet, and I jump in
push
front.
her in front of you.
I jump in front of the bullet, I take the hit, I fall to the ground, and then the music starts playing. People applaud, credits roll. But are we willing to die to ourselves? Are we willing to live sacrificially? And another big thing, I know this potentially could bring on some soteriology jokes, but there's the sense of we were chosen, before we've done anything good or bad, and he chose to love us, and chose us to be our bride, and we should have that same kind of predetermined type of
Mhm.
love for our spouse. I chose
Yeah.
Lakin to be my wife. She's the one that I love. So regardless of how I feel, regardless, if we had a big fight over whatever, the day before, she's the one that I've made a commitment to loving. Because, if my love is based on, anything other than that commitment, before God, then it's not really an unconditional love. There's no ifs or buts and vows. I promise to love you if you do this, or I'll always
Sure.
love you, but
Yeah, that's actually, because for those who predestined, he also chose.
Mhm.
So, being married is the predestination, right?
yeah,
You're predestined because you're married.
yeah.
The choosing is the daily thing for you as a married couple is like, oh, I still choose to make this, I still choose
choosing
you.
to love despite.
Yeah, it's that, and that's a hard one when things aren't amicable, or when things aren't sunshine and rainbows and roses, and it is hard. But I think I love Erin more today, not because my feelings for her have grown,
Mhm.
but because I've had more opportunities to sacrifice,
Mm.
right? And so my account is running up, right?
Mhm.
And there's infinite amount of compound interest in that, right? Because every little sacrifice brings you into a deeper realm of love. So it's like, I am not going to go hang out with my friends every Saturday night like I used to. I never did that because introvert. But that's one thing. But then what's the next thing? Right? Because the next thing is going to be a little bit bigger than that, probably. I don't want you to take that job because it'll take you away from the family. Well, that's a lot harder to do. But if you haven't done a little sacrifice along the way, you don't have the compound interest to go, okay, I'm going to do this bigger sacrifice. It's easier once you've given yourself to a life of sacrifice
Mhm.
for her. And now, I don't want to run the risk of sounding like, yeah, so marriage is just doing all the things you don't want to do. Really, in Romans 12, it says to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Let God's word sit on your heart and change the way that you think. Then you will know how to please God. Again, we got to go back to that. You have to want to please God.
Yeah, I think it was Matt Chandler that said there's hundreds of ways that God could use to sanctify you, and marriage is the fastest way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great. No, that's very true. And then have kids
Yeah,
and throw that into the mix. The interesting thing about kids, so if you want to know how Christ loves the church, get married. If you want to know how God loves you, have kids. Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because I
I love you, but I want to kill you right now.
well, maybe not. He does have, there is wrath, there's righteous anger, but then Christ,
Yeah.
because it's funny how your perspective just completely shifts once you have kids.
Mhm.
People that don't have kids, I remember I was in a green room one time, and my friend, I gave Taylor, it was an iPhone because it was like I think an iPod video or something to watch something, and he audibly in the room goes, "Ugh, when I have kids, they'll never look at a screen." And I just busted out laughing because he doesn't have kids. He's married and can do whatever he wants to do. And now we so smugly look at each other, me and my wife, every time we're around them, and his kids just constantly on an iPhone. I'm like, people that don't have kids just don't understand. And the depth of your understanding of God's love is deepened when you are in marriage, but also when you have kids. Like I used to not have to worry about any of that stuff, but now and it's like your kid does something wrong, and you're just like, I gave you rules. The rules are there to help you, not to hurt you. and they're just constantly disobeying. It's like, why? I just want what's good for you. Don't step off of there. You're gonna bash your head. Oh, you bash your head in. Okay, cool.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
you know the like, hey, don't do that, and then they look at you and they smile and they do it anyways.
Yep.
It's like,
Yeah.
huh? Yeah, maybe that's how God feels too, right? When
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, I know I'm not supposed to, but I really like it.
Your kids bring you to your knees, and hopefully the first thing you do is say, "I'm so sorry, God." You know.
So we got a couple more. In what ways can we as the church better provide support and guidance for couples experiencing these kind of marital difficulties?
Yeah, definitely fighting the urge for hot gossip. It's probably the best one, you know. And judgment.
Yeah, well, and I think it's just providing tools too. You know, there's things like the is it Henry Cloud, the Boundaries series, things like that that are good. And so, you know, whether that's maybe it's providing marriage conferences or marriage retreats or things like that too. You know, not that we're experts, but just a way of, hey, let's talk about these things and actually, you know, either create tools or find tools that, you know, how can we help you get past this?
Yeah.
And, you know, because it should never be a rash decision. It should always be well thought if you're going towards that, you know? And so it's like, how can we better help you understand your decision, understand what you're going through? How can we help you reconcile, you know, those kind of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. To your point about, you know, withholding judgment, I think that's a big thing because I think not just for divorce, this would really apply for, or marital struggles, really any kind of sin issue. You know, I think it's easy for people to feel, you know, shame or over just anything that they're struggling with. And when you are struggling with something by yourself, because you're just afraid, oh, what are people going to think if, like, they know that things are rough with my marriage right now, or things are rough in whatever area of my life, you know, they're not likely going to be able to get the help that they need to repair that. And so, you know, if we as the church, as the body, you know, are able to just be like, yeah, you know, we all kind of suck. We all we all have our issues.
Yeah.
Let's just sorry. You know, if we all are just willing to, you know, come around each other and help each other out, and, you know, mentor people that, you know, we can help, or seek a mentor in any areas that we need, and you know, just being able to welcome people with open arms and being like, hey, we're here for you.
Yeah. And fight the age segregation mentality.
Yeah.
It's so funny, man. It's like so many couples, I just need to find more couples my age. You need to find more couples older. You need to find some couples that have wrestled with God and lost.
Yeah.
Like, those are the ones that you need to be around. And that's what happens at church. And it's really kind of one of the only places it happens. You're not going to find it at your kid's school. They're all your same age. They're all struggling too. And there's like the level of competition and keeping up with the Joneses and all this kind of stuff. You're not going to find it in any kind of mom's group. You might find some shared struggle, but man, when you go to church, you're going to see that couple that's been married 60 years and is standing strong. That should be a hope for you, not a discouragement for you. And furthermore, if you're in community with those people, they're going to pour into you. They're going to raise you up. You know, we will often kind of, especially in just modern culture, toss aside the older generation. It's like, man, let's stand on their shoulders. That's how you reach the stars. You stand on the shoulders of giants. And we have spiritual giants in our midst, in our church. I've been married next month 20 years, and that's fine. But there's people in our church that have been married 40, 50, 60 years. Find those people. If you want marital counseling and you're struggling with your marriage, by all means, I can counsel you, but they can show you. They have definitely been through everything imaginable. And beyond that, just like the struggles of, I've raised my kids, now I have grandkids, and now they have, it's like, it's just a rich tapestry, to steal your word. I know, like, He's
Good one.
tapestry of struggles and triumphs, and it should encourage you, not discourage you. And so dive in. Don't just stay to your generation, but see that the older generation has so much to offer spiritually.
Well, I think it's important for like us as pastors and just people in the church to be transparent and be okay with sharing that, you know, it's not okay. You know, if you talk to somebody that's been married for 60 years, you know, and it's like, hey, how do you stay so happy? And sometimes the answer should be, we're not always happy, you know, and being willing to say, you know, because it's the same conversation of when you feel like you're alone, like, man, we're fighting all the time. I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. And you're like, but they're happily married. Well, sometimes you're seeing the good that they're showing. It's the Instagram marriage, you know,
Yeah.
like everything's great, but they're not. And so the more that we understand that we allow ourselves to be transparent and say, it's not all great. Like you said, the conversation is always, oh, we never fight. No, you do fight and you will fight. And that should be an honest thing that you say, like, hey, you're going to get married, you're going to move in together, and you're going to fight. And it's not going to be good sometimes. But how do we reconcile with each other? How do we show grace? How
Yep.
do we have those hard conversations? And sometimes the best answer is, let's take a break. Let's walk away because we're both frustrated right now. How can we get back in this conversation and communicate well? Because when you're angry, you're not going to communicate well. But so I think it's important for us as a church and as Christians to be transparent, because I think the problem is this image of Christians is that you have a great marriage, everything's great, everything's happy, and it's not always going to be happy. And we're always going to struggle with things. And we need to demonstrate that to people that we aren't, because we have Jesus, where everything is peachy. You know, it's really just, I'm living my life and I'm struggling, but I have this relationship. And it's important, like, to discuss that.
Yep. Be honest with your struggles and where your holiness.
Yeah.
You know, it's also good to purvey, like, there's a tendency to not want to judge, and so I'm not going to come down, but be honest too. Like, you know, especially the older generation who has gone through this and stuff. It's like, don't pull punches. I need to know.
Yeah.
If I'm being a bonehead, tell me, you know, hey, you're not being kind to your wife right now. There needs to be, you know, Christian and church discipline as well. So it's like,
Yeah.
this discipleship is the root word, discipline. And so we need to be disciplined. We need to be stern with those underneath us. We need to submit to those who have gone before us and realize that this is not a solo venture. This is a group pilgrimage from glory to glory. And hopefully when we all get to heaven, we'll share in that, you know, and celebrate that.
So last thing is just, how can we better extend grace and compassion to individuals that have experienced divorce?
That's a good one.
I
How
think,
can we better extend grace and compassion?
yeah, I think we forget that it's hard on both sides, no matter what the situation, even in the grounds of, you know, unfaithfulness or whatever, it's still hard for both parties because there is love there. I remember this was, you know, something that I experienced when I was younger, when my grandpa passed away. My grandma, who I don't know how many years they had been divorced, it was quite a long time, but I remember her going up to his casket and just basically being like, you know, wake up, like, why did you leave? And, you know, it's like, how long has it been since they hadn't been together? And I know it was hard through all that, but there was never a point at which she didn't love him. And so, it's the idea that even when you go through these things, you still are carrying something with you. And I think it's important that we do extend grace and compassion, because it is a hard thing for both parties. Even if you're like, yeah, this is the best decision we can make for us or for the kids or whatever, it still is hard because you've built this life with this person. And even if there is the infidelity or whatever thing, there is still that sense of, I love this person. Like I married them for a reason,
Yeah.
and
Kind of like your story that you told.
yeah.
Yeah. And, I think I mentioned in the message that, sometimes single people get kind of pushed aside.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly true for divorced individuals, but then now you add the scarlet letter to the situation. It's like, well, they're single, but they're single because they sinned or something like that. It's like, you know what? By the grace of God, I go. Judgment is not mine. And we'll talk about judge not lest ye be judged and what that even truly means. But God's going to judge your secret sin. What's in your life that just because you didn't do it publicly is causing you shame? Think about that and then put yourself in their shoes after that. It's like the cross is not a place of shame for anyone but Christ. Christ bore our shame, and so why keep wearing it ourselves?
Yeah.
And so it's easy to, especially that small town mentality. It's like, oh, so and so, she's divorced. Did you hear what her husband did? It's like, who cares, man? Like, love her, love him. Even the ones that are hard to love, show God's love. Show them that God does not hate them by loving them yourself.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah. So this coming Sunday, we're talking about oaths.
Oh yeah. Quaker oaths.
Quaker oaths.
It's hard to say, right?
Quaker
vows
oaths.
and oaths and staying true. Honestly, we're wrapping it up in. So I've titled the message "Truth Recession." Truth recession. We honestly think about recession as a economic idea, but as we've been talking about inflation of rights, inflation of money, and stuff like that. Well, there's also the idea of inflation of truth, and the more misinformation that is out there, the more watered down the truth becomes, or more specifically, the more harder it is to find what is true. Even Pontius Pilate said, "What is truth?" Like, who decides what is true? Well, God does. And we need to stand firm on that. But us as kingdom citizens have to represent the truth well. If we are constantly adding to the truth, if we are constantly watering down the truth in the way that we interact with each other by lying to each other or being dishonest or not transparent or wishy-washy, how are they ever going to hear the truth if we are just filled with the misinformation?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for checking out this episode of the podcast. We're going to continue to do this every week. Again, if you have any questions or anything you'd specifically like us to talk about, you can send those in. And, just we hope that you can catch our messages on Sunday, join our services, whether that's online or in person. And we'll catch you on the next one.